Hey there, Refuge Church. I'm jazzed to be with y'all again. We are trucking our way through Genesis. So I'm going to pray and we'll get into it. Father God, I thank you that you're with me as I teach this morning, as we look at this story that's oh so familiar to so many of us. I pray that you would show up in exciting ways, unexpected ways, life-giving ways, Lord, that these words might be a blessing to everyone who hears them. I pray that you might be with me, that your spirit would use me to serve your people, Lord. I pray that my words might be helpful and true and a blessing and understandable and clear, Lord. I pray that your will would be done in this passage, whatever it might be, Lord. I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so Genesis chapter 7 is where we are. I am going to read it for us. Genesis 7. Yahweh said to Noah, "Come, you and all your household, into the box, for I have seen that you are just before me in this era. From every silent animal which is clean, you shall take with you 7 and 7, male and female, and from the silent animals, that is, that are not clean, 2s, male and female, also from the flying ones of heaven, 7 and 7, male and female, to keep their seed alive on the face of the earth. For after 7 more days, I will cause it to rain upon the land 40 days and 40 nights. I will wipe away all that rises that I have made from upon the face of the ground." Noah did all that Yahweh commanded him. Noah was a son of 600 years when the flood was water upon the land. Noah came and his sons and his woman and the women of the sons with him into the box from before the face of the waters of the flood. From the clean silent ones and the not clean silent ones and the flying ones and all that glides upon the earth, 2 and 2, they came to Noah to the box, male and female, as God commanded Noah. It was 7 days, and the waters of the flood were on the land. In the year 600 of the life of Noah, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on this day, the eye of the great deep was cleft open, and the lattice work of heaven was opened. The rain was upon the land for 40 days and 40 nights. On that very day, Noah and Shem and Ham and Japhet, sons of Noah, and the woman of Noah, and 3 women of his sons with him, came into the box, they and every living thing in their form, and all the silent animals of their form, and every gliding thing that glides upon the land of their form, and every flying thing of their form, and every bird of every wing. They came to Noah to the box, 2 and 2, from all the flesh in which was the spirit of life. They entered, male and female of all flesh, and entered as God commanded him, and Yahweh shut them in behind him. The flood was 40 days upon the land. The waters increased and lifted the box and raised it high above the land. The waters conquered and very much increased upon the land, and the box walked upon the face of the water. The waters conquered more and more upon the land and covered all the high mountains that were under all of heaven. 5 and 10 amma upward, the waters conquered and covered the mountains. All flesh breathed out their life that glides upon the land, the winged ones, the silent ones, the living ones, and all that teemed upon the land, and all humanity, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life from all of the dry land died. All that stood upon the face of the ground was wiped away from humanity, to the silent ones, to the gliding ones, to the flying ones of heaven. From the land they were wiped out. But Noah survived, and those with him in the box. The waters conquered upon the land 150 days. Okay, there it is. There's our Genesis 7. We're going to do our message today in 2 parts. So the first part, we're going to make some observations on the chapter as a whole. And then in our second part, just like when we started kind of the prologue to the flood, we're going to compare it with the Epic of Gilgamesh story and talk about how God might have been using this culturally prescient narrative to say something about himself, about who we are, and about the world, right? Okay, so first off, general observations. Our very first verse says that God sees that Noah is just before him in this era. So that word there is the word for justice. It's not some word to do with the morals, right? When we insert our idea of morality and, oh, Noach was just really good at following these certain culturally assigned rules, or he was good at not sinning, we can kind of miss it, right? Because the previous chapter is all about what? Violence, running amok, causing chaos in the good world that God made. And we saw the difference between the way that the Epic of Gilgamesh tells the story and the way that God told the story is that God is frustrated not with humanity, but with violence. And so Noach's contrast that he was just has to do with him abstaining from this violence, right? And he perhaps learned this from his dad because his dad was the Lamech who chose in the midst of all of that chaos to use his power to bless, right? Rather than commit more violence, to let everything keep snowballing. So God sees, this is after their patronage relationship has begun, that he is just. And so he therefore chooses him for this special mission to save the world in the most, superhero-y version of a story that we have in all of Tanakh, right? Saving the world is not usually something that comes up in the stories in Genesis. It's usually about families who are struggling to get along and find healing after hard times, right? But this is not one of those stories. This is a big story. But so Noach saying no to violence, his heart for justice is what causes him to stand out to the Lord and to be chosen for this mission. Okay. This is important that God sees his heart, not just because like you earned it, kid, but because the task he has to do, to fulfill is extremely difficult. He had to build this huge boat. We received the dimensions of, I believe, earlier. And he has to take care of all of these animals. I don't know about you. I get a bunch of really bad storybook Bible art from my childhood pops up, weird quilts. It's always 2x2 for some reason, even though the text says 7x7 and 2x2. Maybe it's harder to fit 7 elephants into an illustration. But that's a lot of work. So the Talmud talks about the ark being cut into 3 levels. The first level has food and Noach's family. The second level has the animals. And the third level is just all of the manure from the animals coming down that Noach's family had to shove down into this lower level, which is pretty nasty work. And so God finding someone whose name means comfort, who is trustworthy to save not just humanity, but to save the animal kingdom and go through all of that work is really important. I find it fascinating that God didn't appear to choose supernatural means to save the world. That's not his favorite modus operandi. He likes to partner with humans who are willing to get in there and do the work. And the story goes, and I think it's Talmud Tractate Sanhedrin, that Noach then used all of that fertilizer to replenish the 12 inches of topsoil that had been ground away by the flood. And so there was a beautiful redemptive purpose in all of that excrement, which is lovely. But so this is an important invitation for us, believe it or not, not just, whittling away our minutes here talking about unpleasant animal facts. The invitation for us is just like Noach, hopefully not just like Noach, but maybe in a smaller proportion like Noach. We can feel like we're surrounded by chaos, like society has gone out the back window, it's in the toilet, and everything Everything is chaos. Everything is unredeemable. How is God even going to use this people, this nation? Really? I've seen Twitter. It doesn't seem like that's what's these are people who, can help put the world back together. Seems pretty unlikely. And so God invites Noah in this story to build a biosphere, to build a new sanctuary, to build a ecologically safe place for his people, and for animals, and for anybody who wanted to take shelter within. We at Refuge have sought to do that in the church landscape. Might feel like it's a little bit on fire, and so Refuge tries to be a safe haven for people who feel disenfranchised from the church for a whole number of reasons, from theological issues to deconstruction to so much more, right? And so we're invited in that way, of course, but so many other ways to build these little shelters for ourselves, not just to stand out there in the flood and say, well, there's nothing I can do. It's just all terrible, right? No, do something about it. Build a thing. Find a way to be safe and to be able to carry on, right? I think that's why it says that the ark walked on the water. All through the story of Tanakh, we have God's people being invited to walk. And so going into the ark was a way of continuing to walk, continuing to go, continue to make forward motion. But sometimes when we're in all this chaos and we're like, I'm going to build something and it's going to be really great. And sometimes it's a church, and sometimes it's just like a new spiritual discipline practice or any other kind of practice that you feel like, oh, I'm going to start journaling. This is going to be good for me. This is going to be my ark in the midst of the chaos. We can be surprised when it takes so much work both to build that ark and to continue to maintain it, right? We don't think about the pounds and pounds and pounds of animal excrement that's going to need to be dealt with in order to maintain this safe little environment that we've carved out to try to find some well-being and flourishing within. So the invitation is to not expect the arcs that we have built to never smell and to be this magical, the cherubim are floating by and there's clouds and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I've figured everything out. But rather, it's still going to be a noisy space. It's still going to be a space that needs a lot of work. And again, this is true whether you're talking about your own life or your own family or something else that you're trying to put together. Expect the mess, because wherever there is life, right? God talks about the living beings when he's speaking about the animals. Wherever there is life, there's going to be mess. And so invitation to reframe, okay, where can I find an ark? Where can I build an ark? But also, how can I expect there to be work and help that shape my attitude toward that space, right? And not put it up on a pedestal and imagine that, oh, if I can only start doing X, everything would be magical. Because that's not helpful. We don't want to be pierced by disappointment. Okay, so that's our first set of observations here about the story. What can we get just from the initial reading? Now I'm going to read some of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which we did before. I'm actually going to read the last sentence that we read last time so you can go, oh yeah, I remember where we are. And we're going to notice, again, not in a confrontational way about, oh my goodness, God ripped off the Bible from somewhere. That's not the goal, to be horrified or concerned, but rather notice, like we said before, that God is utilizing a cultural touchstone to the people who were the original recipients of this text and to speak to them something about himself and ourselves. So let's read. Again, you can find any PDF online, Epic of Gilgamesh, type it in. There's a whole bunch of translations. All right, these are the measurements of the bark, Barque, of the bark, as you shall build her. Let her beam equal her length. Let her deck be roofed like the vault that covers the abyss. Then take up into the boat the seed of all living 24 creatures. Only 24, very interesting. When I had understood, I said to my Lord, Behold, you have commanded I will honor and perform, but how shall I answer the people, the city, and the elders? Then Ea, who's one of the gods, opened his mouth and said to me, his servant, Tell them this. I have learned that Enlil is wrathful against me. Enlil is a different god. I dare no longer walk in his land nor live in his city. I will go down to the gulf to dwell with Ea, my lord. But on you he will rain down abundance, rare fish, and shy wild fowl. It goes on to talk about the building of the ark. It's pretty lengthy. But this deception that's just been set up, so if you missed it, the protagonist asks the god who told him to build the ark, hey, what should I tell everybody that I'm doing? And the god who he's speaking to tells him, just tell people I'm going to take this boat to go down the Persian Gulf. Probably, I don't know what the Gulf is, but probably the Persian Gulf, right? For a little vacay. God is just going to rain some abundance down on you, along with rare fish. Like, you're tired of eating tuna? The salmon's coming, my friends. And then he gives them a whole bunch of wine. It says both red and white, flowing like the rivers the whole time. They're building this ark to maintain this. Don't worry about it. The flood is not a scary thing. It's going to bless you. Don't worry about anything at all. Okay, so continuing. Now, the epic continues and describes the flood coming. So that's what I'm reading now. With the first light of dawn, a black cloud came from the horizon. It thundered within, where Adad, lord of the storm, was riding. In front, over the hill and plain, Shulat and Hanish, heralds of the storm, led on. And then the gods of the abyss rose up. Nergal pulled out the dams of the nether waters, and Ninurta, the warlord, threw down the dikes. And the 7 judges of hell, the Anunnaki, raised their torches, lighting the land with their livid flame. A stupor of despair went up to heaven when the god of the storm turned daylight to darkness, when he smashed the land like a cup. On one whole day, the tempest raged, gathering fury as it went. It poured over the people like the tides of a battle. A man could not see his brother, nor the people be seen from heaven. Even the gods were terrified at the flood. They fled to the highest heaven, the firmament. They crouched against the wall, cowering like curs. We should definitely bring back the word curs into modern usage. And then goes on to say some other descriptions that are really lovely, and you should probably read it. It's fascinating. But the last thing I want to mention is that Ishtar, they're going to have a sacrifice. We're going to talk more about it next week. But Ishtar says, oh, I would not have had this happen. All my people are being decimated. Why did I agree on the divine council to put up with this? I'm not pleased with you, speaking to the God who is the one who came up with this plan. All right, so that's the general narrative, at least in our portion today, of what corresponds with Genesis 7. So what stands out? What are the similarities? What are the differences? What pops out that might be instructive for us? Well, the very first thing, at least for me, is that God does not order Noah to lie or to deceive anyone. So he doesn't tell us in Genesis what Noah does do to the surrounding people groups when they see him building this huge box, right? And the Midrash tells us that that Noah is described as being just in his generation, in his era, only rather than just overall, because he did not tell people what was happening and encourage them to come aboard the box with him. If that had been what he had done, then it would have said he was a just man. But because he was not compassionate, did not preach about what was going to happen, did not invite others along with him, he was only just in his era. So Midrash kind of fills in the gaps a little bit. I've heard some Christian tradition as well, which is interesting, of what pops to mind. What did he tell people, right? And so that's an interesting thing. But our God does not tell us to lie or to deceive people. Hopefully that's not surprising to you, but it's something that would have stood out to these people of this time. If you are bringing this kind of tribalistic mindset of God's people and then everybody else, then it makes sense. Well, of course, you can tell that everybody else, whatever makes them feel better, and just give them lots of wine and meat and stuff, because that's their thing. But God doesn't do that. He doesn't set up an us versus them. He just says, I want you to do this. And he leaves it seemingly to Noach to decide how he is going to interact with this violent world around him. Okay, the second thing that stands out to me in this section is a section that I apparently forgot to read in the stuff that I deleted. Okay, so he tells the protagonist to take his household and to take the 24 living creatures, but he also tells him to take gold. So my apologies that I didn't read that for you. That's my bad. But what is fascinating to me is that God doesn't tell him that, right? He just says, take yourself and your household. And it actually reminds me of Jesus, when he is speaking to his disciples in the 70 later on, he's sending them out and he says, don't take anything with you. Currency is not worth taking up space and weight that could be taken up by living souls, right? God does not value gold and currency and the substance of our economic system that's built up around us. Sometimes in our Christian culture, we think that God has mandated a particular economic system that it's our duty as Christians to uphold, and yet we don't see any hint of that here in this story. Okay, I'm just scanning to see if I can find it real fast, and no, I can't, so I'm not going to spend more time on it. All right, you can just trust me or look it up. The second thing, or the third thing rather, so if the first thing is Noach didn't lie or deceive anyone, or God didn't tell him to anyway, second thing is the household line lines up very, very closely, except for in Genesis version, he's not to bring any gold with him. Third thing that stands out, at least to me, perhaps to you, is the line, even the gods were terrified at the flood. They fled to the highest heaven in the firmament. They crouched against the walls, cowering like curs. Again, putting in my petition to bring back cur as an insult. But okay, God obviously in the creation and the Genesis account is not afraid of what's happening. Yes, there is still some dualism that pops up if you're paying attention in Genesis 7. Mountains were at that time thought of as epitomizing gods. So water is covering over the mountains is like the water is covering over gods and conquering gods. And we saw the eye of the deep was splintered open, which is a pretty personified image, right? So it's not that the Genesis version is devoid of dualism, but if there is an opposing force in Genesis, God is not concerned about it, which I love. It's not that there are no other Elohim, right? There's lots of Elohim, but God is Yahweh Elyon. He's the one above everything. And so even if there's these spiritual forces, or the deep is personified, or the flood is personified as this figure of darkness, our God is not one which is terrified or even bothered by their emergence, which is comforting, at least to me. But the last, most perhaps important thing here comes to light in the lines where the gods are responding about what this other god is doing, and then Ishtar pops up and says, ugh, I wish you hadn't had us do this. I'm so displeased with you. This would not have been my preference. In the world of Samaria, right, which would morph into all these other people groups over time. And in many polytheistic cultures, the idea of the cosmos is not very ordered, right? Is like, oh, we're not having rain today. This is the rainy season. Our crops need the rain. Some other god must have triumphed over the god of fertility or the god of the rains. Things aren't going well up there. That's pretty arbitrary to not know, is Elle winning? Is Enlil winning? Is Ishtar winning? They're all such powerful figures. I don't know what's going to happen. It's all pretty arbitrary who is going to be strong on one day and who's going to be strong the next day. One of the points of God describing himself as the God who is above everything is that this idea of the way that the world worked and the world turned was it was set into these this zodiac structure, right? This framework, and different gods presided over different areas of that, and they had different strengths at different times. And so, on a particular day, anything could happen, and it could be because some god rose up against another god. So, in this story, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we definitely see that happen, right? The gods are kind of grumpy, and so this one god has an idea and persuades all of them, and then they regret it. Our God, the God of the Bible, is not arbitrary. He does sigh that he made humanity. He does rethink his first creation and decide to start anew, right? Again, there's still some malleability there if that's just a reflection or an edit from this story. But that's a conversation he's having within himself, and it's over this long period of having patience and trying to strive with humanity in the midst of chaotic violence, right? And so there's comfort to the original hearers of the story to say, my God is not going to be overturned by a whimsical strategy of some political move from a deity in the divine council, right? Because our God is above all of these things, above the zodiac, above the polytheistic world in which they were a part. We do not have to worry about, our God's having a bad day. I hope he gets better. We should all pray and give lots of offerings, right? That's not built into our religion. And I think sometimes we take that for granted when we say our God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Yay. That's the original context of that promise, right? That our God isn't going to be overthrown. He is trustworthy. He is secure. He is someone who we can put our trust in. He is all powerful. And that's not just being like, our God's more powerful than your God. It's about, because of that, because I have relationship with him, because he is my patron, I can trust that tomorrow will also be okay because he is still in control, because he still rules and reigns. So that is our invitation this morning. Combined with the other one, right? So I'm going to pray. Lord, I thank you for this story and the fact that even though so many of us grew up with it, that there's still beautiful things, good things, helpful things for us within it. I pray that you would help us to find arcs, to build arcs when appropriate, to have little spaces for well-being, for survival in the middle of our chaos, whatever that might look like. I pray, though, that we would enter that space knowing that there's still work to be done. There is still smell. There's still human messiness or animal messiness to sort through. And I pray that you would prepare our hearts to say, yes, the space is worth me continuing to do this work. I thank you for the spaces that we do have, and I pray that we would continue to take care of them well. Finally, I thank you that you are a faithful God, a God who is not troubled by or surprised by the workings of this world. The fact that you are sovereign over all things is not something that's designed to oppress us, but rather give us foundational plane on which we can stand and say, I don't know what's going on, but I do know that you are good. And so I pray that if we are struggling to believe that you would show up for us this week, and that you would open our eyes to see, that you would take us by the hand and greet us face to face, that we'd be reminded of the goodness of your character and the fact that you are faithful and unchanging. I pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. Okay, guys. We'd love if you were to join us. If you haven't joined us, you can get that Zoom link if you're far away through refugepullman.com. Also, there's a button there, boop, floating in the bottom left that says give. If this is a helpful community for you, if these videos have blessed you, we are in need of your help, and we would just be so blessed if you were to give one time or recurring, whatever works for you in your household. Have a wonderful day, week, evening, whatever it might be. Bye, guys.